Have you ever felt like your apologies just aren't good enough? Well, I felt that way. So join Priscilla and me today as we talk about what went wrong in my apologies and how God has shown us how to make them right.
Hi, this is Phil and Priscilla Fretwell here with Savage Marriage.
We're going to talk about how God is healing and restoring marriages today from betrayal, addictions, and the wounds of their past.
And what he did in our marriage, he can do in yours too.
So, Priscilla, 10 years into our marriage, you caught me looking at porn. Remember that day?
Very clear in my head what happened that day.
Because it created an enormous problem for us.
Problem and pain.
I mean, we had, normal problems everybody has going through their marriage, but that was probably a defining moment for us in our marriage, don't you think?
Oh, definitely it was. And I remember it very clear. It was a surprise. Did not see it coming.
And I could tell the pain that it caused in doing this. And so I reverted back to the only thing I knew on how to heal a rift like this, and that I needed to apologize. Of course, I never learned much about apologies. All I had was the playground apology.
Right.
You know, the old template. I'm sorry. Oh, I forgive you. That's kind of all I knew, but I knew I needed to do it as earnestly as I could. And I tried to really put some enthusiasm into it. But as we look back on it, Priscilla, what do you remember about the way I apologized?
Well, what you said, which is it was quick. You were doing the backstroke, trying to save yourself out of the situation that you got caught. And so it was done very quickly. I'm so sorry this happened. You showed no real emotion.
Yeah. I was trying.
Yeah.
I knew I needed to, but I just couldn't.
You weren't connecting with me emotionally. I think it was save my butt out of this situation. And so the connection between what this whole thing made me feel and what you had done was not there.
Not there. Okay.
Not there at all. And your sorry was probably there was no value in I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it was just words. There were no actions involved in it. And of course, we never talked about any of the details.
Yeah.
I didn't ask you what kind of porn you were watching. I didn't ask you anything. I was just so freaking mad and angry about you even watching it. That's all that mattered to me.
I figured the fewer details, the better, because you were just going to get mad at everything. So I had no idea. Yeah. I was just trying not to die, that day, and do what I could. But what about after I apologized? What do you remember about what happened then?
We didn't talk very much about my feelings and what this whole thing of watching porn had caused me to feel. The inadequacies that I felt in my sexuality and being a woman. Because to me, it was, you went out on me because I wasn't enough.
And so we really never explored that. And I never asked you any questions about that. I mean, I was afraid to ask you questions just because I didn't know where this was all going to lead.
We wanted to keep everything together. Don't change anything here because we don't want to lose anything. I think that's how you felt. Let me just keep it all together because I've been in a lost situation before with my parents.
Well, I also remember not talking to you very much about what happened with the counselor. I mean, that was kind of my little private zone.
Right. That was really mute.
You wanted to know.
And you said, don't ask me questions.
Well, I said something like, if I have to tell you everything that I'm talking about with him, then I'm not going to share much with him because, this is me and him. We're buds, In
other words, don't ask me anything.
That's right. Don't ask me any questions. So we really just kind of went on mute on all that was happening.
I also don't remember you ever asking for forgiveness. You said, I'm sorry so many times, but will you forgive me? I don't remember that. And in all honesty, I didn't forgive you for 17 years.
Well, I look back on it and I was hoping that my apology would elicit I forgive you. And I was probably not humble enough to put myself right at your feet and say, will you forgive me? Because I've hurt you so much. So I really didn't ask for any of that. But, I think about that whole scenario that we've described and even, this template on the apology of I'm sorry and then I forgive you, that we learned growing up. Do you remember getting any instruction on how to apologize when you were growing up?
No. The basic, Tell them you're sorry and then give that person a hug or say, everything is fine. I forgive you.
So no feelings.
No feelings,
Right.
just words that have of no value, really.
And basically forced.
Yes. You have to say the words.
Yeah. Just say you're sorry, Johnny,
Right.
and hug it out.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people are in this. But in our story, 18 years after this event, where we just continued to swirl here for 18 years, I came to you with a lot more to confess at that point, not just porn, but now massage parlors and all sorts of sexual morality that have been going on. This time, though, I was really broken. It's not that I had gotten had taken a course on how to apologize. It's just that inside of me, I was a broken, remorseful, regretful man. And this now came out in a new way of communicating an apology and remorse to you. And I look back on this now, Priscilla, because we've used now what we learned through all that, what I've learned, and we've come up with a different way to apologize. And I look back on it, I think my biggest obstacle to my apology was really my pride at that point. I think that apologizing basically says that this relationship with you is more important than my ego. And I had to put that aside. And that's something I didn't do 10 years into this. I was still in a really big protection mode with you instead of putting it all aside. But 18 years later, I was so broken over what was going on that I really needed to take a step of humility towards you. And that started with laying out my regret and remorse to you in a form of apology.
And I will say that, in the beginning of you coming clean and you apologizing and asking for forgiveness, it was a lot of ups and downs, a lot of redos on apologizing, on coming to a place where you felt the pain that I was feeling and seeing what the devastation that had been done to
Yeah.
me in my innermost parts of my soul. And so I think it's been a learning process, and God has been so gracious to us in the ups and downs and teaching us more and more on how to come face to face with one another and apologize for our shortcomings.
Yeah. Well, we want to unpack that for everybody today and really explain how we've learned to go through this process in a way that really does, I think, take people toward a step toward reconciliation, because that's really what we're talking about here. Apology is something you can do. It doesn't guarantee reconciliation because that takes two parties and not one. But what we have found is that an apology can be powerful. And it can actually melt the heart that's been hardened by your own sin that you've committed against a spouse. And so we want to share that today. So the first thing I see that was different when I apologized 18 years later was that I really tried to touch your feelings. I really wanted to come into connect with you on not only what I had done, but how what I had done made you feel.
Right. I mean, you had come to the end of your rope. You come to the feet of Jesus, and I think you see your sin and what you have done to me and the family. And I think that makes all of us, when we see our sin before God, come to a place that we realize we have affected our spouse in a deeper way than just saying, I'm sorry.
I think the first time I apologized, I was really focused on me.
Yeah. You
I
were.
am hurting. I'm not doing well. And I need to express an apology to you in order to save my skin. That's
Right.
really where my focus was. The second time, I was really focused on you. I saw what I had done to you and my family and everything else, and it took me to an utter place of brokenness. So the entire focus of the apology was much different the second time.
Yeah, I mean, you had to come in and touch my wounds. There are 5 major wounds that people usually have. One is humiliation, which I felt humiliated because now
Mhm.
you're told me you lived a double life. That means, everybody's going to know.
Mhm.
And then 2 would be betrayal, 3 injustice.
'Cause you didn't think you deserved any of this. You had been the good
That's
Christian
right.
girl, yeah.
Why should this fall on me now? And then abandonment, that you just abandoned me.
Mhm.
In our marriage, you abandoned me. And rejection, you didn't want me, so you went to other people. And those are the rejections that we all carry, and I felt like all of those happened all at once for me. And it's one of those things that I believe a spouse really has to go back and say, "Let me see what I have done in this area," and then work through that area of abandonment, rejection, whatever the wound is. You have to go back. You can't just say, "Oh, it's all done and good."
So it becomes not just apologizing for what I've done, but for the way I wounded you.
Right.
I have made you feel humiliated and abandoned and rejected, all these things that you mentioned. And you wanted to make sure that I knew those things. Well, I had to make sure that you knew that I understood how much I hurt you in each of these areas because they were big wounds. And I think that, Priscilla, that was one of the most important things that allowed us to move toward reconciliation after this is that you became confident that I understood the depth of what I'd done to you and hurt you with this. And we talked about this quite a lot.
Quite a lot. I mean, like I said, we worked through all 5 of these in our marriage,
Mm-hmm.
and it took months and months to work through them. It was not a one and done.
Yeah. This isn't one conversation and we got it all solved.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it takes a lot of time and effort and tears and awkward conversations
Yeah.
of saying, "Yeah, this is how you made me feel in this."
Well, the second thing that I think that was really different in the apology 18 years later was that my regret and my remorse came out in my emotions and even in my posture. And I needed to let you see that there was deep remorse and regret in me, even without words. It was almost like if I was a silent movie, could you see that I had remorse and regret in me, even without the words I said? What do you remember about those things that day?
I remember you being almost like a nervous breakdown. I mean, you were crying, you were weeping, you were asking for forgiveness, you were looking at me and just saying how sorry you were for all this pain. And it showed in your face that you were completely undone and not caring how you looked.
I think this is one of the biggest things we hear from spouses sometimes is, he confessed, but it was like he was reading the newspaper,
Right.
you know.
There's no emotional connection here with the person.
Yeah, the confession and the apology, this is not about sharing information. This is about sharing a heart, which means that you have to come out and let your emotions, your regret, your remorse show through. What's on the inside has to come out on the outside here. And when that happens, it affects the spouse that you've offended. It really does. It helps soften the heart, I think.
A third thing that was different was your willingness to talk about the offense over and over, because I wanted to talk about it,
Yeah,
you know?
we revisited this many, many times and continue to revisit it and
Eh,
talk about it.
That's right. 5.5 years later, we're still talking about it. It's not an everyday occurrence, but hey, we mention something every week. And to be able to go back and talk about the feelings or the event or how maybe it's a thought that runs through my mind and I want to go back there, you are always willing to do that with me. And I think that helps in the healing of our soul.
I think so too. And it lets you know that it's safe for you to explore the questions that are in your mind about whatever I had done at that point. And and it's good for me too, because it allows it to continue to come out and be something that God is working healing between the two of us. This is another one of those areas, Priscilla, I think that we get a lot of frustration from spouses, because they have questions about what happened. And the offending spouse will say, listen, I apologized about that already. And I don't know what else I can do at this point other than apologize. And the fact is, the spouse that's been offended may have a lot of questions. And these questions may need to be asked more than once and answered more than once.
When the offending party shows resistance to talking about anything that has been disclosed, the offended party goes, "Wait, what's up?
Yeah.
Why are you all of a sudden defensive about this? You shared the details 3 years ago. Now I ask you a question and you don't wanna talk about it?"
Yeah. It creates questions,
It does, a lot.
suspicions.
Yes.
Yeah. The door to revisit offenses and share details has to stay open. And the details that are shared, I mean, this is one of those other things. Sometimes we'll hear about somebody that went in and says something very general like, I apologize for the way I hurt you. What the heck does that mean? You know, because it doesn't communicate. I understand your feelings. It also doesn't share any details of what I've actually done. So the details need to come out to the extent that the offended party wants to know. And there can't be a withholding, because to the extent that the details are withheld, I will tell you, if I had withheld details from you, Priscilla, you would have created details in your head.
Yes, I would have.
And they would have probably been worse than what I did.
Yeah.
And I know that that's hard to think about it that way, because usually everybody's in a protection mode in these situations. But the details have to be willing to be shared, or otherwise people just get stuck in this.
Well, that would come to number 4. I saw in you that you were willing to change in yourself. And I think one of the first things you did was, I'm going to confess to my kids. And I got to tell you, that was huge for me.
Yeah.
That was huge. I was like, oh my goodness, it's only been 2 weeks and he's talking about sharing with the kids, because I actually never thought you were going to do that. I was like, he's going to go back to old Phil. But you didn't, and you said, we got to talk to our son, Michael, the first one.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, wow, this is going to be different.
Well, I knew that my actions needed to line up with my confession and my regrets, and I needed to show real repentance through this. And it's almost like, the verse that says faith without works is dead. It's kind of like apologies with no action is dead.
That's right.
You know?
Or an apology that's, I'm sorry for everything I ever done to you.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what?
Just a blanket apology.
Right.
We don't just put that on the wall, and if you get hurt, I just say, look at the sign, something like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that was another big piece. Another one, and I'd say this is the 5th thing that we've seen through this, is I really needed to accept full responsibility for what I had done. You weren't to blame. I couldn't deflect anything to anybody else. I couldn't blame you in any way whatsoever. And that was a big change, because I think the first time, Priscilla, even though I don't know that I blame you so much, you felt blame for that because of the inadequacy, right?
Right. I mean, I felt like I was the problem, and that's why you went out on me.
Yeah, and I did nothing to rescue you from that.
No. I mean, I thought I was the problem for the next 17 years.
And so in this next one, I went out of my way to assure you that what I had done was not the result of anything at all that you had done.
And the last thing that was really different was the humility that you had. You came to me in a humble state of asking for forgiveness, saying, I don't know how to fix this. I know I screwed up so badly, and you have every right to leave me. But you humbly asked, will you forgive me? Will you help me? And that changed everything for me.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that God gave me clarity for a few seconds there for me to say, okay, I'll help you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was different, and it was somewhat of a risk, because I knew that I had confessed quite a lot to you, but it was really a place of humility that I think God was leading me toward at that moment. So, Priscilla, what about somebody that thinks they've done all this and their spouse still won't forgive them? He says, man, I went through all 6 things here and I laid it out. I was humble. I connected with her feelings and her touched the wound and all this stuff. And my spouse still doesn't forgive me. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you should ask your spouse about it. Each of these steps that we have gone through, ask them, is there something in me that you see? Because, sometimes we are the last persons to see ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But if you ask somebody else, what is it that you're seeing that I'm blind to? It could be good.
Priscilla, what you just said, I think, is huge, because we are in the worst place to evaluate whether our apology has been adequate, because we always see it in our favor on this. So we have to go back to our spouse and say, what about this? Do you think I really understand what I've done has made you feel?
Well, I don't want you to think that we have only apologized twice to each other, because that is not what we have done. It is a continuous thing here in our household, not only just to one another, but to our kids.
Yeah, I've heard somebody say that repentance is really the secret of the Christian life and our relationship with God. And I think this thing on apologies is really a type of repentance towards one another. It's I'm sorry, and I'm going to take steps not to do this again.
Right. Well, it's an act of humility, right? And in First Peter, it talks about that we should all clothe ourselves with humility, one
Hmm.
towards another.
Yeah.
God opposes the proud. He gives grace to the humble. Apologizing, asking for forgiveness, entering into a pain of your spouse or your children, it's it's a humble place to be.
It really is a humble place. And I think that right after the apology is, and here's how I'm not going to do it again.
Right.
Right. But that has to be the tagline on to an apology. That certainly didn't exist in our first one,
No,
but in the second one, it did.
it
And
has.
we've worked a lot through on how it's not going to happen again, because I think sometimes people apologize and they do it again. And then a spouse says, your actions don't line up with your words.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this is probably the most important step you can take toward reconciliation in your marriage, not just off a major offense, but on the day-to-day offenses. And I hope this has been helpful to you. It's been something that we've learned over a period of time. And Priscilla, I'm glad I've learned it with you. This is Phil and Priscilla Fretwell. Thanks for listening. Our book, Savage Marriage: Triumph Over Betrayal and Sexual Addiction, is now available on Amazon.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Savage Marriage Ministries. Also, join our Savage Marriage community at savagemarriageministries.com.
And remember, it's God who is at work in your savage adventure.